Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Quick introduction. My name is Jo. I am one of the directors with Ten2Two. Ten2Two are a part-time and flexible working specialist recruitment consultancy. We've been around for 18 years, I think. Fighting the good fight, educating businesses and securing part-time and flexible roles for candidates. We also run a lot of these sorts of events. Way back in the day, they were face-to-face in a church hall. We've gone up in the world. But we do like to support our candidates with as much guidance as possible. So please do check out our other webinars if you enjoy this evening, because there's lots of really useful content out there. So this evening we are going through creating a winning CV. It's quite a punchy presentation that Tracy's going to take you through. I'll probably introduce Tracy in a second. So there is a lot of information. Please don't worry about writing copious notes. We will follow up tomorrow with a recording so that you can pause it and go through it at your own pace. We will also have a couple of attachments and a Q&A document. The presentation itself is going to be around half an hour or so, leaving us with 10 minutes at the end for questions and answers. Sometimes the presentation does go over. If it does, or if you have lots of questions and we don't have time to get to them all, we will get to as many as we can tomorrow in the Q&A document. Or you can always contact us directly if you want to speak with us individually about any questions, queries, concerns that you might have, or additional guidance that you might need. So I think that I've said everything. There is a Q&A box at the bottom. We don't have the chat live because it can be quite distracting for people who are trying to pay attention to the presentation. But the Q&A box at the bottom, you can pop any questions you have in there. I will either try and address them while my colleague is speaking, or we will come to them at the end, or as I said, we'll follow up when we can.
Yeah.
I've mentioned my lovely colleague a couple of times. I'm now going to properly introduce the lovely Tracy Adams, my fellow director with Ten2Two. Tracy's going to take you through the content this evening. So without further ado, over to Tracy.
Thank you very much, Jo. And as Jo said, it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. We'll be covering off some quite basic things, really, but hopefully no matter where you are with your CV, you'll pick up some useful tips to apply to your CV or start from scratch. So let's go on without, as I said, any further ado. So what's the agenda? Why do you need a CV? Where to start? Because it can feel daunting. What are the basics? Just some of the basic tips around sort of content and stuff. Then the chunkiest bit, probably, that we'll spend the most time on, the main component. That's the really interesting meat of your CV. Some things to avoid on it, and then just a summary and a recap and time for questions. So I'm going to go straight on to why a CV. So first and foremost, the purpose of a CV is to get you shortlisted for an interview. You want to be on that yes pile for a hiring manager or recruiter to read your CV. The minute you can get onto the yes pile for an interview, you've got that opportunity later for a proper interview, face-to-face interview, hopefully, to really sell yourself. So you need to make it as punchy and effective as possible, as quickly as possible. So that's the purpose of it. It's a sales tool. It's a selling document for you. It is still the primary currency. We do hear a lot of talk about our videos, you know, going to be the future of CVs, our LinkedIn. It is still the primary currency. I don't know any clients, I think, currently that we've got that ask for any other format. It is still a CV. It's got to be, therefore, a well-presented selling document, as I've said, and that's what the purpose of this evening is. It's also used as a script. So for you, it's actually quite, I think, quite nice if you're doing your CV from a fresh or from a blank piece of paper or going back over it from maybe you haven't touched it for 15 years. I think it's quite a nice script for you to think about your old career, your career, remember some good achievements. It helps you think through chronologically what you've done and how you've got to where you've got to, and that story is important. It's also really important for hiring managers when they're interviewing. It will be the document that's used in your interview. You know, they will use it to ask you lots of questions and explore more. So it's a script as well. And it's not a stagnant document. You really must we'll keep talking about this evening, tailoring your role, tailoring for the role that you're going for, tailoring your CV. That I'll probably say that on almost every single slide, and I'll try and explain how to do that, because some people sometimes can't sort of grasp how to change it enough. But that is really important. It isn't the same document for every job application, and that's, you know, we'll hopefully explain more about that. So the other thing is, and obviously again linked to the tailoring for the role you're seeking, it highlights the experience relevant for that role. That's why you've got to tailor it, because your 2-page or 3-page CV isn't going to cover every single eventuality. So you need to make it cover every eventuality for the role that you're going for. So you'll be taking things out and putting things back in. So where do we start? Now, it is daunting if you're going back to it for the first time in ages, or you're starting from scratch. It feels like you just don't know where to start. So I think, first of all, get yourself in the right frame of mind and space. You know, it's not the sort of thing you do between dinner time, bath time, whizzing in and out doing chores. Really give yourself an afternoon or some time to get your head into the project, into the doing. You need to think about who your audience is, and this is going to be hard to judge. You're not going to know necessarily who your audience is. So you'll have to write your CV in a way that it will probably have to appeal to a broad audience. So it could be the hiring manager, the manager of a team in a company. It could be a junior in the team who is simply looking at the CV for certain words to pop out. Could be a system, a bot, a robot, a system, a techie looking at it and scanning for words. It could be a very senior or technical manager who knows the ins and outs of your industry. So you just don't know who it's going to appeal to, and you have to really make it work to cover all of those eventualities. So just adds a bit of a layer of thinking to what you're writing. Be clear on your work goal. You know, are you coming back into pretty much, or are you applying for pretty much the same sort of role that you're in, but maybe it's a bit of a push, it's a bit of a challenge, this one? Are you trying to completely change career, completely pivot into something new, and why? You know, so think about your goal for your CV. So if you're a marketing manager, but you want to go into, say, office administration, there's no point in your sort of CV talking about all about marketing, because it won't have relevance for being an office manager. You need to explain what your goal is, what you're trying to get into. And then create the basic outline. And that's what we're going to talk through now for the rest of the presentation. And we will follow up with some examples, some helpful information to get you going with that outline. Once you've got that basic outline, you know, that is easier then to tailor and pop in the information that you need. So some of the basics. This should help you hopefully just refine some of that information on your CV, and it might cut out bits that you don't need as well. Contact details. All you need now, I would say, is your name at the top, and then underneath a way of contacting you, your email address and a mobile phone number. You don't need to put your full address. You don't need to give your marital status. You don't need to say whether you have a driving license, unless the role includes that. But at this point, just your core details so they can get hold of you. You might want to put based in Hertfordshire or based in London. You might want to put that, but it isn't always essential either. LinkedIn. If you've got a LinkedIn profile, and don't worry, you don't have to have a LinkedIn profile. Not all jobs find it useful, but if you've got a LinkedIn profile and it's pretty active and it looks okay, put it in. It's another way that a hiring manager will do some research into you. Formats, fonts, bullets, type, font face, you know, size of type, everything like that. So format, I always think the most straightforward format is a Word document, and we'll touch on this a little bit later. Use bullet points, use a readable font, don't go too small, don't go too big. Use a readable font, and a Word document is best. If you can make it into a PDF, that's fine, but we'll talk about why it's better to keep it simple going forwards. Length, there's always, I think you've probably all heard the urban myth about it's got to be 2 pages. Well, that's nice if you can, But if you have got quite some decent stuff to talk about, 3 doesn't matter, you know. It's for us, again, as you come through the presentation, you'll see that we talk a lot about that first page, the information on that first page. But it doesn't matter if you've got 2 or 3 behind it, because it probably they will get to that at some point if your first page is impactful. So don't get too hung up on that 2 pages. It doesn't matter so much. Relevance. So if you've done some great things, but you're really proud of them, which is completely understandable, but it might not be relevant for the job you're applying for at that moment. So don't include it. Only include stuff that is relevant for that role that you're applying for. You might have a long list of technical training you've undertaken over the years. Say you work in IT, you might have tons of technical qualifications, but not all of them might be relevant for that job. So don't waste the space including them. And education, you know, again, some of us have got 20 or 30 years behind us where GCSEs or O-levels or CSEs were 30 years ago. You know, you don't necessarily need to have that if you've got higher qualifications and more recent experience. So really what's relevant. And then a photo or not, we generally say no, just no, not, it just possibly leads to unconscious bias. So I don't think photos are necessary, and they take up space. So a little quote there, just keep it as easy as to read as possible. So what are the main components? So this is the chunky bit, and we're going to break it down into each of those elements: the profile, the skills, your career, education, and then other information. Generally, as a rule of thumb, this is quite a nice order. Profile at the top, key skills. On the first page, your first chunk of your career history. On the next page, it'll carry on. Then your education, and then some other info at the bottom. That's generally fairly accepted and seems to work for us. Works for us when we read them. So let's have a look at what is a pen profile. So you've got your name and your contact details at the top, as in email and phone. The first little paragraph you want is a short paragraph, 4 or 5 lines, 2 or 3 lines even, that says who you are and what field or experience you've got. For example, the role might be looking for a marketing manager that's CIM qualified and has worked in the tech industry. So you'll say, I am an experienced CIM qualified marketing manager with experience working in tech. I mean, you might have other retail and something else experience, you know, or it might say a qualified CIM qualified B2B marketing manager with 15 years experience working in sectors including tech. You know, see what I'm trying to say? It's almost exactly what they're looking for. I mean, obviously don't fit, it's got to be you, but it's in 2 or 3 sentences, you're just trying to get across really quickly what you can do and what your experience is. You could throw into that paragraph certain skills that you think they're really looking for about growing teams, scaling up. You could talk about names of companies that you think will really impress them in for this particular job. So you could try and shoehorn in certain information like that. So include your relevant words, and that we've said there to mirror the job advert, literally. And again, this is the tailoring, this is mirroring what they're asking for. And it is that opportunity to sell your skills and experience, and don't be shy. If, for example, you work in sales and you've never missed a target in 15 years, put that. It's got to really wow that first paragraph. Then you go on, the next bit underneath the pen profile, it's a really good place, if you can fit this in on your CV, to have a short list of bullets. You could do this as 1 list, or you could do it as 2 sort of columns of core skills. Just listed some examples here, and this is probably a bit of a mixed bag. There's not one person who probably has got all of that, but this is just an example. You might talk about administration, you might talk about management, man management. The beauty of this little technique is that you can play around with these for every single job application, tailoring it again, tailor. You can take stuff out and add other words in. You can play around with the order. So you've got the best ones, the most relevant ones at the top of that list. that this is a nice little device. It doesn't have to take up much space. You could have, say, 4 bullets in one column and 4 bullets in another. It's not much space. If
Add
you've got,
into that, sorry, Tracy,
yeah,
just add into that this key skills box is a really good way of really giving your buyer or your potential employer what they want. So you can pretty much take it from their person spec, the key
yeah,
skills that they're looking
yeah,
for, and you can articulate it in words that might not necessarily fit when you're talking about your career chronologically or even within your pen profile. So it's an incredibly useful way of
yeah.
articulating and communicating your skill set very, very clearly and mirroring that job spec.
Yeah, absolutely. And things like here as well. So if they are asking for certain technical experience, like here we've talked about SAP and Sage, a certain software, you can throw it in there as well, add it in there as well. So yeah, really nice little device to try and have on your CV at that point. And so at this point, hopefully we're only probably only a third of the way down that first page, with your name and underneath email and mobile, couple of sentences, 2 or 3 sentences for your profile, and then this. You're only really maybe up to half of that first page. So you've got a lovely chunk on that first bottom half page, which we'll go on to next, talk about your career history. Because what you want on that very first page, and this is where we'll probably have lots of discussion and questions, to be honest, about my most recent career isn't necessarily my best because, I had a break and I've come back doing something that's okay, but I want to get back to what I did. So this sort of front half page at the bottom is going to be where you can really try and get in your career. And you might have some nice big names you've worked for, good jobs, interesting jobs. You might have had stuff that you've been doing that has just been tiding you over, but we can talk about ways of managing that as well. So always try and do chronological. Start with your most recent employment, even if it's a career break. So you want the reader, remember, to not have any question marks when they're looking at your CV. So if there's lots of gaps and it's jumping around a bit, that's immediately putting question marks into the hiring manager's mind about, oh, what did they do then? I don't get that. So be just chronological. And if there's a gap, put a gap in there. Again, career gaps, that is a whole different webinar that we do run. And we will send you links to ones we've done in the past, because managing a career gap on your CV, there's lots of little tips and tricks on how to do that. So we'll follow up with something in the FAQ tomorrow with that. No more than 15 years, include no more than 15 years worth of career on there. So in an ideal world, you'll sort of, as you're going down your chronological order, you'll sort of reduce the number of bullet points and descriptions about those jobs. And as you get to your much older ones, it'll become really just a job title and the year you worked there. However, I do appreciate that, for me, for example, I've got some lovely brand names which were probably 20 years ago, and I might like to have that on my CV. So if you want to keep them on there, you can have them on there, but as a really simple summary. And if you are worried about your most recent job not being the best fit for you, just make it a bit shorter. Don't have loads and loads and loads of bullets about it, because then you can start to get some of your older CV history up on that first page as well, or sort of further up. So more than 15 years. I wouldn't, if you want to cut it off before 15, you can, but by all means, don't worry about that. You can keep older stuff on there. Focus on the achievements. So there's it's easy, I think, to do lots of bullet points and list what tasks you did, what responsibilities you have. But actually, what's really interesting is some of the things you might have achieved in that job. And you might split it and you might say, a couple of lines about what the role was responsible for, but then you might have 3 or 4 bullets that actually gave some good solid achievements whilst you were there. But that's up to you. Generally, achievements are really, really strong. Try to avoid industry speak, lots of acronyms. Going back to that point about who your audience is, we don't know who your audience is going to be. It could be somebody who doesn't necessarily understand the industry speak and they're just looking for certain things on the CV. Use data. So when you're talking about achievements, try and give scale to your answers. So it could be around you achieved X% of a target, or overachieved X% of a target, or you beat a deadline by X. And I probably say beat a deadline, but I'd say, you achieved a project ahead of deadline by X. So scale does give impact. It is helpful. And then try to use action verbs rather than, and I've always used to be guilty of this as well, talking about being responsible for. I mean, you are responsible for an area. You are responsible for an area of business, but it does really, really well when you can use certain words like, I don't know, you led a project or a team, you managed, you communicated. It just sort of gives variety to the writing. So let's have a look at an example of sort of those two slides popped together to give you a sort of a fairly simple example of how it can work. So marketing manager, company X, it's quite nice to try and put the company name. It is nice to put the company name. You need the company name, but a company description can sometimes help, especially if that's really relevant for the job you're going to and the sector that they work in. I haven't heard of every single company in this country. So actually, you will be having companies on your CV that I don't know about, and I don't know that it's relevant for the job until you tell me what they do. So really there, it's a really simple. Company X is a leading distributor of with a turnover of X. And again, with a turnover of X, gives the hiring manager, if it's relevant, I mean, include it if it's relevant. If it's a similar sized company to the one you're going to, if you know that information, it's always they're just thinking, yeah, that's relevant. They've worked in a sort of similar sized business in a similar sort of sector. Great. Reason for leaving. So if you've had quite a few moves and this happens, and particularly over the past, I'd say probably 15, 20 years, actually, we've had a couple of recessions, we've had all sorts of stuff going on, not only the pandemic, we've had wars, we've had, all sorts of things happening that mean there are loads more redundancies. People move jobs because of relocation, having family, having to care for someone, health. So if you might have had a number of reasons for leaving a job. If you've got a reason for leaving, that will give them a picture as to it's not, this is life. You relocate, or the company relocated and you couldn't go with it. So that sometimes will just dispel, or I suppose, yes, dispel any other questions. The hiring manager might look at your CV and go, oh, they've had a few jobs over that period of time. Are they a job hopper? But if there's good reason for it, then it's easier for them to understand and grasp that. And then here, just the 4 bullet points for that role as an example, using those action words. So, designed and implemented a new social media campaign, and again, giving numbers and data to support those so they're really much more impactful. So that's a way, I think it's quite a neat way of writing about your experience. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how to approach each of your roles. That's the biggest chunk. I think once you've done that bit, that's probably going to be a big sigh of relief, because that is probably a huge part. And then you come on to education, training, other. This can all be around training, and other can be things like voluntary work you do as well, interests. So let's talk about these then. So training, education and training. So start with your highest level of education. If you have, again, as I said before, if you've been out of school for say 20 or 30 years, your GCSEs, CSEs, O levels aren't as relevant as a degree or even a professional qualification or experience sometimes. So start with your highest level and work down, and you don't necessarily need to have absolutely everything on there. Include relevant training. Really think about what training is relevant for the job you're going for. Include letters after your name in your contact details. So if, for example, you are an ACCA qualified accountant, it would look lovely on your CV to have your name followed by ACCA on your name on the top of your CV. By all means, you can include the detail here as to when you got it or where you got it. but after your name, if you've got any other sort of letters like that, brilliant. Additional information, it's one of those things that some people put on, some don't. It's usually around volunteering is really helpful and a lovely thing to add on. Interests, I like interests on a CV. I think it gives a little bit of a personality. And actually, for an interviewer, if you are successful and get invited to an interview, it can be something to talk about. You know, there might be something on there that's actually there's common ground and it's a conversation starter. So I'd say put it on if you've got room and you're happy to. So that's the main component, I suppose, the main part of the CV. And I hope that's sort of tried to give you a visual of how to lay that out. Now, I know there's going to be loads of questions probably about the CV part and the career, but I'm going to try and leave enough time that we can cover plenty. But some of the pitfalls to avoid. Be honest. I know sometimes we can maybe exaggerate or omit certain things, but you know, you're gonna have to talk about this CV. You don't want to catch yourself out, and further down the line, if you get offered the job, you don't want to catch yourself out then. So just be honest. You are what you are. Achievement you're confident about. So again, you've got to use this to talk about yourself at an interview. So make sure that you are confident about the information you've got on there. You can remember that information well, you can recall it and talk about it well at an interview. We come back to the formatting. So a little bit more about this now. Fancy fonts and formatting. There are a lot more places, our employers, recruiters are now using a bot to sort of, I suppose, pass CVs to pick out certain information. If you've got a really fancy designed, graphically designed document, I'm not sure that it is 100% reliable in all of the systems and software. And as an example, when we submit a CV to someone, if you've left your address on and things like that, private information, which under GDPR now, we don't want to share with an employer until you've got a job, we convert that into a Word document to take off some of your private information so it's hidden. Now, if you've got quite fancy documents, it just makes it really awkward and changes the display of it. So you're better off starting with something more straightforward and not overthinking it. Now, if you're a creative in the creative industries and design, it's really important to present yourself for that particular role. Still bear in mind that complexity, because I think there's other ways for creative and graphic and design people to demonstrate their sort of portfolio, you know, with links through to file sharing and things like that in portfolios. So just be aware of how CVs are used. Long acronyms, as we've mentioned, just think this, read your CV, get someone else to read your CV actually, or read it with a fresh pair of eyes and think about if someone junior in that company was reading it, would it make any sense? And unexplained gaps. That's where hiring managers might just question what's going on. If there's lots of gaps or unexplained gaps, and you remember you want to get it onto the yes pile. So anything that raises a question. Now, before I go on to the final slide, get someone as a final thought. You know, once you've done it, I know it's a bit cringeworthy getting someone to read your CV. Yeah, I find it cringeworthy if it was mine. But get a friend or a partner or someone in the family to read your CV, just to proof it, cast a fresh pair of eyes over it. You're so close to it and you're so close to your career. Sometimes it's hard to step away and write objectively. So just in summary, and hopefully we've left good time, 10 minutes, good, to answer some questions. So it's going to be an easy read, you know, concise, comprehensive, descriptive, and personal to you. You do want to get your personality across in it. Be relevant to the role. As we've said in so many places now on the CV, you can tailor and make it relevant in the pen portrait, the key skills, any of those sections, and within your roles, make it relevant to the sector and the profession. and show transferability. And I'm wondering if after this slide, Joe, I just talk about a skills-based CV briefly. That might well be a question.
I think that would be very useful for people.
Okay, so I'll talk about that transferability in a minute. Leave no question marks. Again, we don't want the question marks. We don't want the hiring manager to pop it on the, we want them to pop it on the yes pile, not the no pile. Chronological is the best, unless you're switching career completely, which I'll talk about that in a minute. That's a skills-based CV. And you want them to move you to the yes pile, so you get an interview, at which point you will really sell yourself. So I know there's going to be questions, and I will just come straight to the skills-based, because what I've focused on so far is all about your chronological history. So pretty much you're going into probably applying for roles that are fairly similar to what you've been doing. If your roles don't look like they are going to be similar to the role, or you're deliberately wanting a complete change, there is something called a skills-based CV. And that would be where you still have your pen profile, but you need to just reflect that pen profile to maybe not talk about the old you, or you do, but you want to pick out the skills that are really relevant to the role you're going for. Let me just use that marketing manager again example. So if I'm a marketing manager and I'm going for a marketing manager job, great. I'm a CIM qualified marketing manager, 12 years experience in X sectors. However, if I want to go for an office manager job within marketing, I would have done tons of operations, organization, deadlines, planning. Those are the sort of things I would talk about in my pen profile. In my skills, little skills box, that's where I would talk about the role, the skills I have got genuinely, but maybe hidden because marketing is the sort of overriding umbrella stuff. That's what I put in there. And then your first page is not the chronological details. You're going to pick out key things, the skills that are needed for that job, and you're going to give an example when you've demonstrated that. So you might be going for a project management job, and you might go project management. There might be managing a team. There might be multiple deadlines, and you're going to give an example from your career history for sort of several of the skills that are needed, and that's your CV. And then you go into the chronological on the back, on the second page. Then you can sort of talk about your chronological. So that's the skills-based CV. It's a bit different, and it's not the most, it's not the most common format, but it's a way of getting around someone looking at your CV and going, they're just marketing, not relevant. You want to bring the relevance forward onto that front page. Does that help, Joe? That's possibly one of the questions, I'm sure.
Yes, that was one of the questions. I'm very sorry, I was just tapping away furiously.
Okay.
The Q&A box has been busy.
I thought it would
Lots
be.
of questions.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, first of all. I'm really hopeful that actually a lot of the questions have been answered in that latter part of the presentation. So I will find some that we haven't as yet addressed. So we've got a question here, and there were a few questions about the software to be used for a CV, and whether Word is actually the best software, because some people have said that it doesn't necessarily lend itself to as aesthetically pleasing a document as maybe some other softwares would. Can we talk a little bit more about why Word is, we think, the most useful piece of software to use?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can still do nice stuff with Word. You can still do columns, you can still do tables, you can still do shading and things like that. So I think Word is good for it, because CVs are going to be going through bots. I don't know what else to call it. Scanners, bots, readers, and if you've got it in all sorts of boxy formats and different fonts and different colours, then I just think there is scope for it not to be read properly.
Yeah.
And the way we use it, as I explained, we need to take certain things off to protect your identity, your sort of private details, and that then throws your formatting when we try to do that. So there's all sorts of quirks with really heavily designed. They look fab, but sometimes I think just straightforward is just as effective, because I have seen a few over-designed ones, you know, where there's lots of little images and graphics and like, or not emojis, but little, and it actually makes it, I think, a bit harder to read. I
Quite
don't think,
distracting, isn't it,
yeah,
from the actual content of the document.
yeah,
I think that Word is so universally used as well that it means that you're not going to trip up by somebody not having the piece of software that they would need
yeah,
to then read your CV at all. As you said at the beginning, if you can convert it into a PDF, then sometimes that gives it an extra bit of sheen.
yeah,
But the chances are whoever receives it is probably going to convert it back into Word to be able to manipulate it in the way that they might need to,
yeah, yeah. Okay.
or their system might naturally convert it anyway.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of you have asked about career breaks, and
Yes.
lots of variations of questions. But the two main questions that we've had are if it's been a relatively chunky career break. So people are saying kind of 5 years, 10 years, but you have been doing things in that break. So volunteering, or you maybe have taken a course or whatever it is. Do you put that information at the top and front, or do you put it in the kind of the other information with the rest of the volunteering that you might have done earlier in your career?
Yeah, I think you could do both actually. So for example, yes, if you have, say you had quite a few years off, but you have done a number of courses or you have done some volunteering, you know, you could say 2014 to present day. You could say something like, you know, career break to bring up a family. However, in this time, I've undertaken a number of courses in X, Y, Z. I've also volunteered at da, 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 da. So yes, you're listing it in the right chronological order, but you're talking about all this stuff you've done in that time. And also you could put it down further down in the education. You know, if you've got your education and you're listing all your qualifications, you could also list them, the courses and the training you've done down there. So that's not going to hurt. But definitely bring it up. So you've got something current to talk about, or fairly current to talk about. The other thing I'd say maybe about if you've had a really big gap, you could use that skills-based CV potentially, because then you know that in your career history or through volunteer work or something else, you are a good team manager, or you are a team player, or you can hit deadlines and work to no budgets and still achieve, you know, and you could talk about that on the front page. So as long as they are the core skills that the job is asking for, and you can find an example for each of those, you could try it that way as well. So there's maybe different ways of trying to overcome that bit.
And I think although there is some talk out there about career gaps being less than positive things, we have lots of lived experience of career gaps getting in the way of candidates securing offers and going on to get really great roles.
Yeah.
I think, as Tracy said, as long as you address it, you kind of label it, you make sure that the potential employer understands what it is that you've been doing, whether that's raising a family, whether it's recovering from illness, whatever it might be. Own it and
Yeah.
put it on your CV and take it into the interview with you, owning that period of time.
Yeah.
There isn't, especially post-COVID, I know people are hating people saying post-COVID now, but there isn't so much of a stigma anymore.
Yeah.
There just isn't. It's real life. We all have career gaps at some point for some reason.
Yeah. Yeah. Should we try and
Um,
do one more, Jo?
well, on that note, somebody has said that they've had a career gap. They haven't said how long, for a medical issue. How would you present that on your CV? So have you got an idea of wording that they could assign to that?
Yeah, I think you still need to put that you've had a gap. You've got to, you've got to address it, because if you don't put something there, there'll be even more of a question mark. And if you're coming back and you're starting to apply for roles, you're clearly back to health, or coming back to health, or recovering and ready to go if you're actually looking for jobs at this point. So that's positive. So certainly put that you've had a career gap in the dates, and say, I think about the wording, but you should say, had focused on my health, fully back to full health, and excited to get back to work. And if you have been doing anything in that time, and I know you might not have been if you've been unwell, but if there's anything else to add in there, that's good. You might have read up on certain industry updates, and been keeping abreast with changes in your industry and stuff like that. So but you still need to put it, because not putting it is worse. It just raises a question mark. At least if someone reads that and goes, okay, I get that. You're applying for jobs, you're back to full health, you know, you're back on track. Great.
Okay, thank you. I'm afraid, guys, we're actually running a little bit over. There are lots more questions in the Q&A box, and Tracy and I will do our very best to address them for you tomorrow. We'll either come back to you separately, or we, as I said, we'll put together a Q&A document. I really hope that this evening has been useful. I know it can be quite daunting putting together your CV. I know that it feels like a really scary document, but honestly, if you can sit down and give it some time and attention, you'll be fine. If you find that you are not fine, there are loads of resources on the Ten2Two website, and we will be sending out some really useful information tomorrow, including a guide with some very, very practical tips in the form of a CV. So it almost gives you a template. And if after that you still are stuck, Ten2Two do provide a CV writing service, which we will send a link out for tomorrow. There is currently a discount assigned to this service, which we can send you out the code for tomorrow as well. So if you feel as though you need some professional support in actually putting the document together, we're here to help with that too. Thank you so much for giving us your time. We genuinely do appreciate you joining us. We love our candidates, so we really want to help you get this document right and get that role. And I'm going to leave you now and stop talking. So go and enjoy your evening.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks, Tracy.
Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.